Friends, family, subscribers to the YouTube channel, Adventuring with the S.G.O.C.C. Please like and subscribe. We are here for part 2 of the St. David series today.
What do you think this is?
We are here with David Barnhill, who is in charge of the Mormon Battalion path and the upkeep and what have you. The Mormon Battalion came through this area in 1848 on their way to San Diego. At the behest of, wasn't it the president of that time that asked the battalion to be formed and go to San Diego? So we had good relations at the time with the president and the politicians. So a couple of announcements real quick before we get into the video. One, subscribe to the channel so you can keep up on all the doings with the upcoming October 7th Cochise County long distance shoot. This will be the first event of its kind in Cochise County. It's 1,000 yards. It's going to have a pretty good prize pool going. We're excited to present this because it's never been done in Cochise County. Next year we'll do a 1-mile shoot if this works out the way we think it will. Secondly, if anybody watching has any connection to St. David and its pioneers and founders, the second in this series on St. David will be interviews with people who have a connection to the pioneers and founders of St. David, and we look forward to sitting down with you and making those interviews. So let's get started with the history of the Mormon Battalion through this area.
Greetings everybody, my name is David Barnhill. I'm part of the Tucson Mormon Battalion Monument Foundation, which was founded in 1995 by a group in Tucson, Arizona to raise funds for the Mormon Battalion Monument. But along with that, the foundation's purpose is to promote the legacy of the Mormon Battalion. So we're here at St. David, where the battalion marched through along the San Pedro River in the middle of December of 1846. And so luckily for them, it was nice and cold and not hot like it is today. But in 1846, when they came through this area, there was a little over 300 men at this time that were still a part of the main body of the battalion. They paralleled the San Pedro River up towards where Benson is now, and then from Benson on to Tucson, Arizona, where a garrison of Mexican soldiers abandoned their fort and took off just before the battalion got there. So the battalion was able to raise the American flag over the Pueblo of Tucson in the middle of December of 1846, and without firing a shot or without any action. There was actually some really good relations that went on there with the local traders and businessmen there, and the battalion was actually able to get provisions and stuff to make their way on to where up towards the Gila River. But after the battalion was disbanded in 1847, in June of 1847, many of them went back to Utah, and then several years later they were asked to come down to settle parts of Arizona, and eventually they made it down here to St. David because several of the battalion members remembered this area and said there was a nice fertile area for them along the San Pedro River to be able to settle, to farm. And so that's what they did. It was probably in the early to mid 1850s, I believe, when maybe a little bit later when they finally got down here to the St. David area. But the Mormon Battalion has a legacy here in St. David, and we're here to celebrate the St. David Heritage Days with a display of the Mormon Battalion. And so these are some of the items we have here. Along the way, the battalion would have hunted game. There's a trap that they would have used. There's some game that they would have hunted. We have a beaver head. raccoon, skunk, coyote, fox, and occasionally, if they were lucky, they'd find a bison to shoot for food. But mostly they had brought their own beef with them, and so they would have beef along the way as well.
These are so soft.
The battalion started out as an infantry battalion, but more or less the battalion ended up becoming, I would call, an engineer battalion, because their main mission was to secure a southern route to California. And at the time they came through here, all of this area in St. David would have been part of Mexico. So during their journeys, they would have used tools such as cross saws, shovels, and all sorts of things to cut down trees for their provisions and places to stay. When they eventually got to San Diego, they were used to construct buildings and wells and things, so they were very resourceful in the tools that they had. So we have a nice little display here of what they might have had back then. So essentially they became an engineer battalion, but they were essentially an infantry engineer battalion led by Lieutenant Colonel St. George Cook. So like I say, they came through the St. David area in the middle of December of 1846, and they would have passed right through this area without giving it a second thought, because their main mission was to go capture the Pueblo of Tucson, which they did a couple days after moving through the St. David area. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. We have a nice relief map over here that hopefully they'll get a recording that shows the route through here.
This is really a cool spot.
These posters show what the Mormon Battalion Monument Foundation does around the state, and even over in San Diego, California, and even up in Utah. We do some stuff up there. But this relief map we have, and you can see in the thick black line there, which goes up through St. David here in southeastern Arizona, up along the San Pedro to where Benson is, up to Tucson, and then on up to where Casa Grande and Coolidge area is. They hit the Gila River here, and then they would have taken the Gila River all the way through Maricopa, which is now Gila Bend, paralleling what is now Interstate 8, all the way down into Yuma, where they cross the Colorado River in Yuma. Now, much of the route that we have for Interstate 10 and Interstate 8 was because of the efforts of the Mormon Battalion that established this route, so that the area was surveyed. And later on, when they had the Butterfield stagecoach and even the Pony Express, they would have had their routes, largely based on the surveying of the Mormon Battalion.
And it wasn't until during the World War II that the interstate highway system was implemented.
Right, during that system. So yeah, so a lot of what you have of Interstate 10 coming through Benson, where the Butterfield stagecoach, a lot of this would have been previously scouted out with the Mormon Battalion, and then the Confederates actually held this area during the early parts of the Civil War, and a lot of what they had was based on what the Mormon Battalion did some 15 or so years before.
So one might safely say that the Mormons were instrumental through the Mormon Battalion in establishing Southeast Arizona.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, obviously, the Spaniards were here previously, and then after the Mexican independence from Spain, the Mexicans would have come here, and they would have been ranching in this area. And one of the famous battles that the battalion took part in was called the Battle of the Bulls, and that actually took place not far from here along the San Pedro River on early in their march up here on December 11th of 1846. And so that's a piece of legacy history of the Mormon Battalion.
Is there an actual site we could go to and actually see where the Battle of the Bulls was?
So the Battle of the Bulls roughly took place right around where Charleston Road and the San Pedro River is, and it was actually a running battle over several hours. There were several large wild herds of cattle that Mexican ranchers had abandoned, up to 10 years previously. So these herds of cattle became wild over time, and the battle ran over several hours, roughly in the area. Everybody thinks, kind of points it down to where Charleston Road and the river connect, and somewhere in between Highway 82, right around in that area. It would have happened over several miles of area.
And look for a future video series where we will go in depth to each site that is the area the Mormon Battalion went through Cochise County. And that's going to be a pretty intensive video series, and we will go far deeper into the Battle of the Bulls at that time. This is fascinating. I did not know that.
Yeah, it was absolutely the United States was absolutely with the Mormon Battalion. That is where the colors were raised over the Pueblo troops on and captured, so to speak, for the United States.
And just a real quick commentary.
Hang on a sec. This way, if people want to read all this stuff, they can pause the video at some point. That's why I go as slow as I can.
Well, I was just going to mention that from what little I've read so far, it wasn't just male soldiers that were part of the battalion. There was some women that traveled with them. I remember reading a story about one fellow's wife who traveled with the battalion, and they acted as seamstresses, cooks, camp help, and what have you. So it wasn't just 300 men marching through the desert. Was it a handcart company?
No, so they actually had wagons. At this point going through, they would have actually had about 12 wagons with them, and up to 100 or so maybe cattle with them at this point. And yes, there were, I think initially started out with 8 or 12 women who were the wives of some of the soldiers who had permission to take them along with them, and they were paid for their services as laundresses and seamstresses for the soldiers. They did get paid.
Were they also cooks?
No, the battalion actually had cooks that were hired by the Army. So their main purpose to go along was to accompany their husbands and be seamstresses and laundresses.
Did the seamstress also deal with leather working?
They might have, depending on their skills. I think that the Army would have probably provided someone who could do the leather work for saddles and the harnesses for the carts and stuff like that.
And the various pouches, like the one you got on your side.
Cartridge boxes and the leather for the baldricks and belts and stuff like that.
Now, is the sheath for the bayonet, is that leather as well?
Yeah, that's all. Everything would have been leather back then.
Yeah. Awesome.
Folks, we wanted to encourage you to like and subscribe to our videos. We want to give a fine, hearty thanks to Brother David Barnhill for hosting this. And subscribe to the channel, because if you'd like to participate in the next series that we go in depth on the history of the Mormon Battalion, we'd love to have you. We love having our subscribers come out and join us.
Get ready.
Cassie?
This has been a Fun Brothers production.